The People First podcast is a show presented by people with learning disabilities for our friends and communities. We talk about issues that are important to us and interview interesting people to find out new information. This is our way to make a difference and have our voices heard.
Hello and welcome to the People First podcast. We have a very special episode for you all today, as we have two very special guests that will be speaking today. We have the pleasure of welcoming Nadia Clarke, who is one of our volunteers, and Dr. Kavanagh.
Hi, my name is Nadia Clarke. I am a volunteer here at People First Keighley and Craven. It is lovely to meet you. I remember listening to your talk at NIDEX. I was really impressed and found it interesting. This is a great opportunity to ask you some more questions.
Hello, I'm Dr. Amy Kavanagh. I am a disability activist and accessibility professional. I'm blind and I'm really excited about the excellent questions that Nadia has for me today.
Before I ask you the questions, please can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So, I'm Amy. I'm 36. I live in West London. I'm a mum, got a little boy, and my lovely guide dog Ava as well. I am blind. I was born with my visual impairment, and I can see some things. I can see shapes, I can see colours. I can see really, really big text if it's right up against my nose. And I work in accessibility and disability, inclusion, and I support businesses to understand how to best support disabled customers and their obligations under the Equality Act.
Why are you so passionate about disability rights?
Well, I'll be honest, Nadia, I didn't used to be. It's something I kind of discovered later in life. I didn't even used to like the word disabled. I didn't used to use it about myself. I used to hide my visual impairment quite a lot. And I think that's because I'd taken on some of those really toxic, negative ideas about disability. You know, that it meant weakness, or that it meant being incapable. I think I was scared of being different. And that changed for me when I finished my PhD. And I decided I didn't want to be an academic anymore, that I wasn't enjoying that career. And that was actually through having quite a challenging time with my mental health. And this was back in sort of 2016. And it was when mental health was being talked about a little bit more. And so I started sort of learning more about that. And then I started connecting like, hey, maybe I have issues with my mental health because I don't really ever talk about my disability or what support needs I have. And so I started finding a community online through Twitter, when it used to be a slightly nicer place. And I met other disabled people online, and I learned about disability activism. And I started sharing my experiences. I started exploring the support I could have, started using a white cane, and just sharing my daily experiences, because I was somebody that had gone from being invisibly disabled, you know, my disability was not visible, so suddenly I had this sort of 1.5 meter white stick with me, and I was very visible as a disabled person. And so I think I offered an interesting perspective that people wanted to learn about online. And so the reason I'm really passionate about disability rights is basically I want to stop anyone else having that experience, right? Where they acquire a disability or they grow up with a disability and they feel ashamed. and they don't want to talk about it, or they don't have the right support. And what I really needed when I was 15 or 18 was somebody like me. I needed to see and hear and learn about disability, not from the perspective of doctors or media headlines, but actually from another disabled person, and to have that encouragement and support and understanding of what it meant to be disabled. And so, yeah, I just want to avoid anyone else really experiencing that and feeling lesser. So I fight for a more accessible world, and I fight for greater awareness, and I fight for greater representation of disability.
What is the aim of your work? How do you think you can change people's perspectives?
Oh, I'm getting a grilling now. I think it is a very tough battle to change people's perspectives, because I think there are so many narratives and representations of disability that are still very negative. I think that work that all of us engaged in disability advocacy are doing is getting harder, actually. I think the political environment over the last couple of years is making it harder. I try to change people's perspectives in a variety of ways. And I think this is really important about activism and advocacy, is actually we need lots of different approaches. So we need people that campaign. We need people that protest, go and chain themselves to buses, what have you. We need people who work within businesses, within organizations, within government even. We need people in public roles, people in the media, authors, comedians, actors. We need lots of different disabled people doing different pieces of work to achieve disability rights. We need people who use the law to try and make legal change, legislative change, policy change. I hope I am contributing to it. And I think social media has a very powerful role in changing people's perspectives, especially younger people's perspectives. But I think the really big missing piece of the puzzle, and the bit that I've not really found my way into yet, is education. And I think basic awareness of education, of disability, basic awareness of disability in education is just completely absent. And we're still not teaching children and young people about disability. And we're not making sure that disabled people's voices are part of education, to normalize it, to equalize it, to get our narrative and experiences out there. So I think, that would be something that would be really important to change, and something I would like to do in the future.
What would you say to the government if you could change the political view of disability within society today?
Oh, I would love to talk to the government more. I'm sure we all would. I think it would have to be a very, very long conversation. I think that the government's current fixation on the value of disabled people is very toxic, and that we actually need a conversation about the barriers that the government itself creates to prevent opportunities and prevent change. So we just had a classic example of this, where the government at the moment are really pushing this narrative of getting disabled people into work, right? Disabled people have to go back to work, using all sorts of horrible language about being left out of society or being on the scrap heap, all this kind of negative language about disabled people who are not in work, reigniting this kind of scroungers, lazy narrative about disabled people. But then they put all that messaging out there, and there was a debate in Parliament about removing the time limitations on disabled people's bus passes. So the disabled people, who are often forced to only be able to use a bus as the only form of public transport because their local railway station is inaccessible, They don't have access to a wheelchair adapted vehicle. The only option they've got is a bus, but yet the concessionary bus pass does not stop working until after 9:30 a.m., which is obviously not working hours. And the government had a chance to scrap that and just to say, it could apply all of the time. So disabled people could get concessionary travel to do things like go to work, go to employment opportunities, go to volunteering opportunities. And they didn't do it. They've kept it in place. That rule will still apply. And that is such a huge contradiction. And it shows actually all of this rhetoric and all of this conversation about getting disabled people into work. They're pushing with one hand, but they're keeping all the barriers up. Not enough support, not creating opportunities, not treating it holistically to see that something like transport is an essential part of getting into work. So that's the conversation I would like to have with government about you cannot change until you remove those barriers.
Who is your role model and why?
Oh, who is my role model? I think a lot about the disability campaigners from the UK in the 90s. The Direct Action Network. I had the privilege of being an extra on the film Then Barbara Met Alan, which was a BBC Netflix film all about the disability rights movement. And it was kind of the love story of these two activists. So with the background of the direct action and stuff that created the Disability Discrimination Act. And I got to be an extra. So that meant Ava and I got to run around in the background and fight with the police. So that was quite fun. But I got to meet a lot of the original activists who were part of that original movement that got us so many of the rights that we have in the UK. So they were real role models for me, and I loved being able to talk to them about all of their work. One of my other role models, I would say, is Haben Girma. And Haben is a deaf-blind lawyer from the US. And she's written this amazing book all about her advocacy journey and what it's like to be a Black deaf-blind woman in America. And I just really admire everything she does. Her book is excellent. The way she advocates is fantastic. The way she communicates is so powerful. And she takes her story and her voice to so many spaces and makes real change. So I think she's probably one of my role models. And I've also met her and we're friends. So
What made you start the Just Ask Don't Grab campaign?
Being grabbed made me start the Just Ask Don't Grab campaign. To be honest, I started using a white cane to aid my mobility, and I had to take a lot of public transport journeys within central London. I was traveling into King's Cross 4 or 5 days a week. And, every time I was leaving the house, people were putting their hands on me. I was getting pushed, pulled, dragged across roads I didn't want to cross, pushed into buses I didn't want to get on, sat down in seats I didn't want to sit in, taken into shops I didn't ask to go inside. You name it, it's happened. And I started by just talking about it, by explaining the frequency with which it happened. That it was, I think I counted once that I got touched by a stranger 16 times in an hour. And it was really, getting attention online that I was talking about this experience. And so many other disabled people shared stories. They would reply and say, I'm a wheelchair user. People push my wheelchair without asking. Or I use a crutch and people have pulled my arm out of my crutch to help me. Or even people who are deaf having people yelling in their faces, and just all these social interactions that for me demonstrated that the wider social public didn't know how to deal with disabled people just living their lives, and that there was this constant need to intervene or to help or do something, often when that help wasn't wanted or needed. And so I used the hashtag as a way to kind of start collecting these stories and give people something to share their stories. And it just went really viral like a bunch of times, and it went in the news. And I did interviews about it. And the reason I started the campaign, because it felt like such an obvious thing to explain, but it was so completely necessary. Just this simple concept of please ask a disabled person before you help them. Just ask, don't grab them. And it feels so simple, but for so many people, I had people stopping me in the street and people emailing me saying, I'm so glad you've explained this, or I didn't know what to do before. And that was great. But it was mainly a space for disabled people just to share that this is really normal, actually, and that happens to lots of us. And it can feel upsetting. It can feel stressful. It was dangerous. People were being put at risk. And then, of course, the other side of it that I started talking about was that not everyone has good intentions, because that's the defense I used to get back, especially from non-disabled people. People are being nice. They just want to help you across the road. And I had to explain, actually, no, they don't. Sometimes they have bad intentions. They wanted to steal my handbag, or they wanted to touch me inappropriately. And that's why actually telling someone or asking someone about the help they needed is really important, because it shows that you do have good intentions. I think the campaign has kind of quietened down a bit now. It kind of had a moment. It's still a relevant conversation, and I think it's still an important conversation. I need to find new ways to have that conversation, I think. It still happens to me all the time. People are appalled when I tell people that I was out in the park and the member of the public just grabbed my pram and started pushing it for me without asking, with my baby in it. And, for any parent, that was just like so terrifying, especially when I can't see what they're doing. And just getting that classic response of, oh, I was being helpful. And it's like, no, you kidnapped my baby without asking me. That was not helpful.
What is the most positive thing about your life?
I genuinely, it's a cliche. I know it's a cliche, but it is being a mum. Being a mum brings me great joy. And there's something very powerful, I think, about being a disabled parent, because society has such low expectations of disabled people that then actually having children is something that we're considered completely incapable of. And more so when my son was younger, and I'm sure it'll happen again with this new baby. But people were just so surprised, all the time that I was out of the house by myself with a baby and nobody else, helping me or supervising me or whatever they thought was needed. So there's something feels very powerful in it about being a parent, about being independent as a parent. I still get lots of help, and that's fine. Everybody needs help. But it is really positive. And the other positive thing is it's taught me a lot about my own disability. And it's taught me that actually things that I thought were going to be my limits have been my strengths. So for many of my friends who are non-disabled parents, they didn't have the experience or the grounding in that kind of adaptability, right? Because as disabled people, just a trip to the shops out the house, we often have to do so much planning and thinking and preparing to make sure that it's an accessible experience. And non-disabled people who are parents had no experience of that. And then suddenly they had this baby that had all these needs, and they had to think about things like step-free access and, is there going to be a toilet that they can change the baby in? And will there be a quiet space for them to try and get the baby to sleep? And they were really unprepared for it. Whereas as a disabled person, I was like, Yeah, but I'm really used to planning every detail of my life. So this, adding a baby into the chaos wasn't such a leap. And also, babies aren't predictable. And again, as a disabled person, my life is not predictable. And I face challenges and barriers and changes. So I found that actually really gave me an advantage that non-disabled people didn't have. And obviously, being a mum is really joyful as well. What I love about it now is that my little boy is beginning to understand my disability and is very proud of things like, he has his guide dog Ava, who he gets to take everywhere with him. And he's proud of her and he really knows the rules. Like if anybody tries to pet Ava, he shouts at them. And you just hear this little toddler voice going, "No, Ava is working," which is so useful.
Why is it important to you to improve accessibility of gaming?
Because gaming is fun. And as a as an activity, actually a lot of gamers are disabled. It's an activity you can do from home. It's an online social activity. And so more than many other media industries, I think it's even more important that video games are accessible because we're the users, we're the customers, we're at least half of the customers. And so they should be making an effort to make gaming accessible. Also, if you make it accessible, it will always help more people than you intended. So, one of the gaming studios did a bit of an experiment where it Ubisoft. So, they released a game that automatically had the subtitles turned on from the beginning of the game. And 97% of people kept them on. 97%. Because people find subtitles useful. Because they might have to play at 2 a.m. with a baby sleeping on their lap. They might be playing in a shared space where they've got a younger sibling doing homework. They might realize themselves that they were missing a lot of information and dialogue through processing delays or other needs that just they hadn't realized that subtitles was a solution for. So actually, it ends up meeting the needs of lots of people who would never say that they have a disability or an access need. Accessibility also encourages creativity. And the gaming industry loves creativity. It loves finding solutions. And the people that I work with in gaming, their joy is in realizing the creativity that accessibility brings. And they're often so proud of it as well. They come up with these ideas that are so innovative and great, and they want to talk about it. And so I find it a very positive industry to be part of, where there's a lot more openness and willingness to talk about accessibility than other places. So that makes it really joyful to do as a job. And it also just means I can play more video games. So that's a win-win for me.
Do you have any funny stories related to living with a disability?
Oh, there's loads of the usual funny stuff. Like being blind, I often say hello to the wrong person. Guide dog Ava sometimes embarrasses me because she nearly failed guide dog school because she has a bit of a habit of barking at cats and squirrels. She gets a little bit overexcited by cats and squirrels. And last year, we were in the middle of Ava's annual assessment. So every year, a guide dog trainer will come out and check that Ava is still working safely and I'm following all the rules. And we walked through part of a park as a shortcut on one of my routes. And Ava saw a squirrel and she went absolutely chaotic in front of this trainer. And I was so embarrassed. It's like, Ava, be on your best behavior. We're being assessed. So Ava does embarrass me by getting overexcited by squirrels sometimes when she's working. But probably the funniest moment I had was I was in the Houses of Parliament at Westminster, and a member of the staff there, and they're really lovely staff there actually, was sighted guiding me. This was before I had Ava and when I was using my white cane. And I had to get to this event in a particular part of the Palace of Westminster, which is this huge building, and it's full of corridors and secret bits. It's not a very accessible building, but they do have certain step-free routes. And they said to me, "Would you prefer to use the step-free route?" And I said, "Yes, that's easier for me to use." And they were guiding me. And we were walking along this corridor, and these were all like, actual back corridors of power. And this member of staff who'd been doing a great job sort of jerked me to the side a second. And I was like, oh, what happened there? And this member of staff said, I'm really sorry, but the Secretary of Education was not looking where he was going and he nearly fell over your white cane. The Secretary of Education at the time was Michael Gove. So I nearly got to trip up a government minister with my white cane. So that was kind of one of my, I might have slightly hoped for it maybe. But yeah, that was one of my funny experiences of being disabled.
What is your future work goal?
Well, with the baby about 6 weeks away, my work goals are going to be on pause for a little bit. But when I go back to work, I would really like to do more work with the media. I used to do a little bit more TV, but they're not very good at paying you. And I realized I was giving a lot of my time for free, so I stopped doing it. But I would really like to maybe become a presenter or a commentator for the news about disability issues. I'd be really interested in doing that. What are my other work goals? I would like to do more business conferences and speaking events, getting my story and my voice out to a bigger audience. That would be really fun to do. I also just really enjoy public speaking. It's something that makes me happy. Like I get a bit of a buzz out of it. So I would like to do more of that. But yeah, being a freelancer like me, there's a real joy in it because I can choose who I work with and I can choose the projects that I do. And if I don't like a project, if I don't like a business, I can slightly more easily walk away from that. And that's great. It gives me power and independence. But it does also mean sometimes it's a bit scary because you don't always know how much you're going to earn in a month or how many work opportunities are going to come your way. And that can be quite scary, especially when you take something like maternity leave. You don't always know how much work is going to be there when you get back. So my immediate work goal is to have some work when I come back from having a baby. But yeah, broader, I would like, to get my voice, get my story in front of bigger audiences, either in person or through something like the media. So obviously this wonderful podcast will hopefully help too.
What does the social model of disability really mean to you personally?
I really love this question because for me personally, discovering the social model of disability was the first step to me accepting my disability. Because for me, I used to think my disability was a failing, that it was my problem, my issue. And discovering the social model of disability meant that I finally understood actually the challenges I face and the issues that I face are created by barriers. They're created by attitudes, decisions, physical infrastructure. And it's not about me just trying harder. It's actually that society needs to do the work of taking away those barriers. So that was revolutionary for me. That changed my perspective so much about my own experience of disability, and it was freeing. However, I think that now I probably embrace a model of disability that's a little bit more complicated. And I really like the human rights models of disability. And I also think that something around the social model, sometimes it's not very good at understanding or embracing people with chronic illness, chronic pain, and chronic fatigue, for whom the experience of their disability can be disabling, because we can create a completely accessible world with lifts everywhere, everyone knowing sign language, braille on everything. But some people are still just going to experience pain. And I think sometimes if we get overly fixated on just barriers, we forget that some disabilities are disabling in of themselves because they create pain or fatigue. And I think we just need to always remember that and not kind of tell people that everything would be fine if everything was accessible, because actually that's not always true. But I think it's very, very important. And the thing I love about the social model of disability is it's a fantastic tool to start teaching non-disabled people about their responsibilities and how actually it is within everyone's power to remove disabling barriers. And I tell people this all the time. Whenever I do disability equality training with businesses, I say this is up to you. This isn't just up to disabled people like me and Nadia to fight this stuff. Actually, it's up to everyone. And everyone has the power to make small changes. And even if that's writing to your MP about why your local train station isn't step free, or having a conversation with the landlord of your favourite pub to say, you should get a temporary ramp for here so someone in a wheelchair can come and enjoy a pint, or taking the time to do an online sign language course so you could at least begin the basics of a conversation with somebody in an emergency. Like, all of those things are within everybody's power. And that's why the social model of disability is really important.
Thank you so much for joining us and answering our questions. It was great.
Well, thank you. Also, I'm really sorry. I didn't realise there was an interpreter signing, and I probably spoke too fast sometimes.
Amy, I'm not actually an interpreter, but because I've worked with Nadia for so long, luckily she understands my terrible sign language skills. While you've been answering the questions, Amy, Nadia's been sort of signing, oh, love it, so interesting. But obviously you've not been able to see Nadia's body language. But yeah, she's you loved it, didn't you, Nadia? A big thumb up and a smile.
Yes. Honestly, Nadia, these questions were so good, because I'll be really honest with you, I get quite a few of these kind of requests. And it's always the same questions. And while I want to be kind of helpful and support different projects, it can get a bit boring. Like, it's always the sort of same questions. And these are really innovative, interesting questions. So I really enjoyed answering them. Well, thank you. Wow. Yeah. And this is important, right? Like, this is why we need more of these opportunities, because Nadia is obviously very well equipped to ask the more insightful questions. And yeah, a lot of the boring interviews I get asked to do are like non-disabled students doing research, or media companies. And the one thing I always really appreciate is when there's obviously questions about my lived experience that are so nuanced compared to the kind of questions I normally get that are like, what is it like to be blind? And you're like, oh my God, I don't want to have to, like, such a silly question. Do you know what I mean? Or people want to ask like really personal stuff sometimes. And it's like, I don't think that that's actually interesting. Like, it is more interesting to have these bigger conversations, right? Like,
that's all the time we have for today. We hope you have all enjoyed listening to these two amazing advocate chat. Do either of you have anything else you would like to add before we end the show?
fabulous. I feel like Nadia and I are going to be good pals after this. I feel a beautiful email correspondence coming on.
Nadia says that'd be great. Big thumb up, big smile.
Bye, Amy. Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure. And email me this documentary and stuff as well, okay? Like, send me that stuff. I'd love to learn more about your work and your activism.
Thanks, Amy. Lovely to meet you.
Bye. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye now.
Remember to comment, like, share, Facebook, Instagram and X. You can find us by searching for People First Podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.